the one thing I did learn is that whenever we got a challenge, if you were willing to look at it, you could probably either divert it, turn it around, or sometimes really make it an opportunity.
Welcome to Ultrahabits. Here, we go under the hood with our guests to unpack the minutiae and to understand what processes and systems they engage or research that result in ultra-enhanced living.
Hey guys, it is RJ Singh here from the Ultrahabits Podcast, and thank you for joining us on another episode today. So today we dive deep into a story of family, community, perfection of craft, perseverance, and trend creation. Joseph William Foster, also known as Joe, was born in 1935 in Bolton, England. Joe's grandfather was the founder of J.W. Foster & Sons Athletic Shoes and the inventor of the spiked running shoe and the trainer. Joe and his late brother Jeff were born into the J.W. Foster and family business, but on their return after 2 years away from home on national service, they started to ask questions. The year was 1955, and the brothers saw a business still deeply rooted in the 30s. The brothers founded Mercury Sports Footwear, which after 18 months, they changed its name to Reebok, and the rest has been history. Folks, really hope you love the show. I never in a million years thought I'd be talking to the founder of Reebok, so it was super cool for me. There were a lot of takeaways. So without further ado, I welcome Joe Foster to the Ultra Habits Show.
Thank you for the invitation. You've almost told the story there, Andrew.
It was a
pleasure.
It was a mouthful, and I always get tongue-tied on the J.W. Foster. I don't know why, so I had to. I could see your beautiful dogs in the background too.
Yes, the glass door. Yes, it does sort of present the image and make it a nice big room.
I like it. So Joe, thanks for joining us today. What I'll do is we'll kick off with growing up in a family business, so steeped in tradition, 3 generations strong. Can you talk to us about what that was like?
Well, I mean, I was born, as you explained, in 1935, which was only 4 years away from World War II. And World War II didn't end until 1945. So the biggest part of my sort of younger growing up was during the war. No lights, nothing much going on. But of course, as kids, you don't know anything different. You just enjoy it. In fact, we probably enjoyed it as much as anybody would without there being a war. We didn't even know there was a war on. You understand it, but you don't really take in what that means. You know, we could stand in our bedroom at night, the air raid warnings going, all the sirens, and see the bombs lighting up Manchester. But I guess in a way, you just take that in as a child does. You just take it in. So growing up, father went to work in the morning. He came back, and then he'd go to the pub. In those days, I think that's what the parent did, or the father did. He went to the pub. And if he wasn't going to the pub during the war, he was doing the dad's army bit, home guard. So really, we were brought up more by mother, and we didn't see an awful lot of father. But it was nice. It was a good childhood. And like I say, we were too young to analyze what goes on during the war. And there was a fun that when the sirens went off, we had to dash into the shelter. You did that for, say, a couple of years. Then everybody just became complacent. So, you know, they don't drop the bombs on us. We're not important. So life was good. But as we know during the book, I was a runner, not a very good runner. Well, I wasn't too bad actually, but I didn't like it. It was something like, you know, I preferred kicking a football about.
Yeah, right.
But, you know, the business was running shoes, and so father thought I should be a runner. And of course, you put a pair of spikes on a kid in 1948, and not many of the children around us had even seen a pair of spike shoes, so I could win races. It's probably like my grandfather when he won his first race, making his own pair of shoes in 1895. Everybody looked and said, cheat, you know, what are you doing in those things? But it was in 1948, in one of the races, that I won Webster's Dictionary. And that's well in the book. And Webster's Dictionary is an American dictionary, which is, well, I don't even know to this day why in 1943 I would win an American dictionary. Maybe because a lot of Americans were over there in the UK, it was the war, and so it is. But then, as you say, in 1958, we tried so much to get my father and uncle to understand the fact that the business was changing. We'd had our 2 years in the forces, and it did to change our attitude. You know, mother wasn't making you a meal, she wasn't making a bed, she wasn't washing your clothes. You know, you were having to look after yourself. Prior to going in the forces, both Jeff and I, during the war, we joined the scouting movement. So we were pretty well used to the idea of looking after ourselves a bit and doing things. And our scoutmaster was quite a dedicated scoutmaster. It wasn't just turning up and having fun. You had to do things as well as have fun. So we were prepared for national service, but it did change our lives. So that when we came out, we look at a family company. Grandfather had started it in 1895, and he had got his idea from his grandfather. And his grandfather, he was a cobbler down in Nottingham, and he repaired cricket boots. And grandfather used to go down there to learn the trade because he wanted to be a cobbler as well. And he obviously asked his granddad, why have these cricket boots got spikes in the bottom? Well, it gives them more grip. When they're batting, when they're bowling, they need that grip, not much slipping. And I think that must have been his light bulb moment. Because back in Bolton, he was part of Bolton Primrose Harriers. He was sort of a midfield runner. He'd end up halfway down the rest. But after making himself a pair of shoes, he came a very unlikely second. Yeah. And that drew attention. It really drew attention. So that was the start of his business. And in the early 1900s, he had world records. He had gold medals being won. But his belle epoque, it came in the 20s when he had people like Eric Liddell, Harold Abrahams and Lord Burleigh. Just get rid of that. Oh, I've lost him. I've done something here which I shouldn't have done. But,
now you're here.
Just one moment, I'll be back with you.
He's hit something that he shouldn't have done.
Well, one of these messages came on like this.
Yeah. Get rid of that.
All right.
Even I'm not very good with the technology either, so it's okay.
And it's you're in Chrome, which I don't use.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my
God. Where's it? Oh, there's that lip behind there. Yeah,
yes, there we go. Sorry about that.
Sorry, Ranjit. A big thing came up and blocked you out anyway, so okay. I thought I'd help this and get rid of it, but I got rid of you as well. Anyway, we were saying the 1920s, that's when Eric Liddell, Harold Abrahams and Lord Burleigh, they all won gold medals.
Right.
And then, I don't know if you've heard of the film Chariots of Fire.
Yeah.
They were the three athletes that were immortalized in Chariots of Fire. And of course, my grandfather, also called Joe, he made the shoes. So he could make lots of claims. And you know, neither Jeff or I knew that much about grandfather. When we joined the company, somehow, yes, we knew grandfather had started the company and it was doing what it was doing, which was making spike shoes for athletes. Very good. But it's only sort of went into Reebok when the business was growing and we decided to look back, that we found out that our grandfather was quite a genius. You know what I mean? In talk about influencers, he knew how to influence because he would give shoes to winners, people who would win. And when they won and they won in his shoes, everybody else wanted his shoes. I mean, today it's the same, but today we're influencing street. So the big thing, but yeah, I mean, going back to the question, growing up, yes, growing up was just like ordinary kids. We didn't know a war was any different than peace until it came along and all of a sudden the lights came on again. And so that was the difference.
Just on that, Joe, reflecting back, how do you feel growing up in an environment that was, you might have been used to the war and the fact that there were raids and bombings, but it's not normal, but you normalized it. Reflecting back, how did growing up in an environment with that type of tension, do you feel it impacted you in any way, positively or negatively?
I think more positive than negative. Because
How?
I think, well, how it brought people together. We had a common cause. There was a common enemy. There was something that was sort of, the parents, that they had to make sacrifices. They did things differently. And, in those days, everybody really went to church. Mm-hmm. And the church was the social gathering for everybody. So, and I think that during the war, as I say, people came together more. People had that common enemy. And, your parents, of course, my father didn't, he wasn't called up. He was in a reserve industry because he was repairing army boots during the war. And, but a lot of the neighbors and people around, they were called up and some didn't come back. So there was that community spirit, which, I think we're losing that community spirit these days. The enemy now is within rather than outside. And I think that focused us a lot. So yeah, I think we probably, in an odd way, benefited.
It's interesting that, because I know your views on globalization, and I know that you probably walk a fine line given your history with Reebok and understanding sometimes the need to outsource because of manufacturing costs. And I get that impact on community, and I suppose what happens through a globalized world is not necessarily always good. I want to talk about your grandfather and your dad and your uncle. In the book, the way that you perceive your grandfather, whether it's just the perception of a grandchild, is one of this larger than life positive force. Your dad and your uncle, however, seem to have kind of fallen a bit far from the tree, in the sense that it seems like you and Jeff have more of your grandfather's spirit. Why do you think your dad and your uncle struggled so much? Have you reflected upon that?
Many times, and we didn't really notice a great deal of a problem until we come back out of doing 2 years. Jeff joined the company 4 years before I did. He's 2 years older than me,
right?
But he joined 4 years before me because I did an extra 2 years at college. And I didn't join the company until I was 17. And I was only there for 12 months, and then I was off 2 years in doing national service. Jeff had done 4 years in the company. But we didn't really grasp the fact that father and uncle just didn't speak. My uncle, he was looking after the traditional side of the company, which was hand-sewn turn shoes. So you turn the shoe inside out and you sew the sole. And that was really what grandfather had started. And I think my father must have been a bit sort of, I can say, a bit of a renegade in his time, because he did see the fact that we needed to do a lower price because hand-sewn shoes were expensive. So he thought we needed to do a lower price shoe, which was doing it, although handmade, it was machine sewn instead of hand sewn. So he'd set up the machine sewn side, and Uncle Bill, he stayed with the tradition. I guess they were both right doing what they were doing, but that may have been how they pulled apart, because there were two separate companies within one small factory, and they did their own bookkeeping. So Bill would do his bookkeeping, and I think somewhere around here they just fell apart and they didn't speak. And when we came back, we had to pull them apart more often. They would fight, and we're trying to get them to work together to to do some marketing. We've got to build a company. And my father used to say to me, well, look, when we are gone and whatever, this will be your company. And I like it. Look, Dad, number one, we don't want you to go. That's not our motive in life. But number two is there will be no company. This company will go before you do. Because unless we change, unless we become today and make shoes and understand the business, unless we do that, there'll be no company. And this is what drove us to leave the company eventually.
And that's my next topic, actually, is this concept of knowing when to walk. You mention it twice throughout the book, the first time from J.W. Foster's and also Reebok. And I think it's really important for our guests to understand where you were coming from. So how does one know when to walk, Joe? When it's time to leave?
Well, I think it's when you can make a difference or when you can't make a difference. And we had to leave J.W. Foster's to make a difference. We had to do that. When I left Reebok at the end of 1989, it's because I couldn't make a difference. We were big. And by that time, you've got lawyers, you've got accountants, and you've got people who can dream up packages and numbers. So it's a numbers game then. And I guess that throughout my life, I've liked the adventure, the challenge, and being able to make that difference and change. I spent a good 10 years, no computers, no mobile phones. The best thing I had was a calculator. And I had to go around, I was going around the world meeting people and making decisions. You couldn't even go and pick up a telephone, a landline, and dial it. That didn't happen. You had to be in a hotel and you had to go through reception and they would use the telephone people to get you a call. And then you'd have to be in your room and wait for the call coming through, which could be 1 hour, 2 hours. Sometimes it was a day later.
Life must be so difficult if you're an impatient entrepreneur, Joe, back then. Huh?
Well, yes, you just made decisions and you got on with it. And I think, I don't even think the word entrepreneur was known in those days. I think it was a challenge, it was business, you needed to do things. So you did things. And when you think about it, you're doing all, you just couldn't refer to anybody. This wasn't a matter of chatting with somebody. Why did you leave in 1989? Well, because I was at 35,000 feet for as much as was on the ground. And I was going to wherever place, because I set up the international distribution. So I had about 27 to 30 countries that I'd actually put on and work with. Okay, we started splitting them up into regions and zones. All this happened, and it still goes on today. But in those early days, I was doing all that traveling, and so I would be picked up at the airport by a limousine. I'd be taken to the best hotels. We'd go out dining at the best, finest restaurants, and we'd talk a bit about business. But business was going on over here. We talk a bit, and we'd more or less reflect on history rather than on worse things going today. So
right,
I got to the point, no challenge. What am I doing at 35,000 feet? And we'd gone through the company, which has grown rapidly. When we got into the aerobics, that took us from 9 billion to 900 billion in about 5 years, 4 or 5 years. It was just a rocket ride, and we became part of Hollywood. We had all the stars wearing our shoes. We did a wonderful tournament in Monte Carlo, professionals, pro-am thing, a celebrity, a pro-celeb event. And there was no shortage of celebrities. They were all there, happy to come along and spend some time in Monte Carlo. And I went into the palace, met Prince Rainier, and shared some champagne. And you think, great, but once I've done that, you're thinking, what am I doing? There is more to life than just sort of flying around. Yeah. So I decided to step back, but it's a bit like Hotel California.
Yes.
You can never leave.
Never leave. or like the
Julie, can you hear me?
or like the
Sorry.
mafia.
Yes.
So Joe, there's a book that I read not too long ago called Small Giants, and it talks about businesses that intentionally stay small with the aim of being great. Now, obviously, Reebok was quite different, but one of the things they talked about, which I couldn't help but correlate to Reebok's journey, was Reebok's focus on craft, attention to craft, and Reebok's intrinsic connection to Bolton. Now, can you talk about craft and community and what that means to you?
Well, I never considered myself a good shoemaker, but I could design, and I think that when you're part of an industry, you have to know what is driving this business, and it means you have to do some things different. In the UK, we were not the only sports footwear manufacturer, but we connected. We connected with the sport. A lot of people made football boots. Some made running shoes, but they were manufacturers. They had a factory. They had the ability to make these things, but they didn't connect. They weren't part of athletics or rugby or football. And I think you have to craft your business to be in it. And so people looked at us and thought we were brilliant. Go to Reebok. If you've got a sport, they will work with you. And as in fact Adidas did over in Germany, and Nike, when they eventually came on, they worked inside, worked in the business. So I think you've got to do that. So your craft really is not so much your product. Your product is a result of your craft. Your craft is being part of what you are supplying. And we became part of that. And so they looked at us. In fact, a lot of the big companies, Barton, in fact, took shoes from us because we were making something that actually worked, not just a product. I remember one of our competitors, I think it was Headlam & Sim. We made rugby boots. And the rugby boot had a facing that went right down the front of the shoe and a toe cap that just joined onto the facing. So it just went straight down right at front, and that was it. There was nice lines. And I found one of the boots, and I picked up this boot, and the toe cap was bigger than the facing straps. And I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, why did that happen? And I can only think, because we were a small company, this is Foster's. Foster's were a small company, and they made mistakes. But people don't know what the mistake is. So we had probably put a boot out there because they just copied our boot. We were probably, and somebody in our factory had put the wrong toe on, and their bags that they picked it up, they didn't know it was wrong.
Yeah.
They were a factory, so every one of their boots would be exactly like that boot. We were a bit sort of not that perfect. We made the right boots; it did the job, but we could make simple mistakes. So this was the Headlam & Sim. Were they part? No, they weren't designing the boots for rugby players. They were looking at us who designed boots for rugby players. So. Yeah, and that was it. So this is our craft, and that I think it is the difference, and it means an awful lot.
So you're saying that the real competitive advantage is being able to connect with the consumer and understand the design in response to what the consumer wants. That's the competitive advantage there.
Well, absolutely. You just got to make that difference, and rugby again. Rugby is a good example. We really made rugby boots for rugby league, and the players would come in, Jim Sullivan from Wigan and Bernard Ganley. You won't know them, but Bernard Ganley held the kicking record, because once you score the try, you come back and you kick. And he came in and he wanted a boot with a square toe. So instead of it being round, And so we had to hammer the toes square for him. So
Custom.
we had this square. So then everybody who was a kicker in rugby had to have a square toe. And so that is working. I mean, now they don't even have hard toes. They use the inside of the boot, but it's a different technique.
You were using influencers before influencing was a thing.
Absolutely. Well, that again is, you say, you look at grandfather, we didn't know that much about grandfather, but the more you look back, the more you saw that he was using influencers. He was supplying, we have a replica of a 1920s letterhead from J.W. Foster's. And on it, down each side, it says, we supply, and there's 96 teams. Nearly every football team you can mention are on it. Man United, Man City, Liverpool, you know, they're all on there. and lots of rugby clubs. And he supplied those. And to this day, I mean, we found this late, but to this day, I can't tell you how sad it is. Jeff and I didn't know that somewhere between my father and uncle, that gap, there's something that didn't cross, and we had to learn later.
Yeah.
We had to learn it. And, I often think, right, they must have been the best football boot manufacturers in the world in 1920, and during the 20s. And yet, you think, but it was late. We picked this up so late. But I think Jeff and I probably had that DNA that said, we can understand we need to do things.
I got a sense through the book that your dad and your uncle had a problem with alcohol, and they were bitter. They were embittered. There was something they weren't happy. Would you say that was right?
I would say there was a big element in there, because my uncle he died an alcoholic, which was a shame. He was a nice guy, but then again, you could, if you were near to him, you could smell the rum, and he would leave at lunchtime and go, and he would drink at lunchtime as well. And now I think back, and I think, even when you're totally sober and
the factory,
great,
right? Yeah.
The machinery. Yeah. How everybody had the fingers, I don't know.
Could you imagine safe occupational and health and safety nowadays going into the factories?
They wouldn't have gone through the front door. They would take one look and shut it down. No, we had this press which used to punch out the soles, and it was a massive thing. It must have weighed about 2 tons, with a big sort of hammer that came down, and you had a wooden block, and then you got the knife which you put underneath. And sometimes it had a clutch. You press the thing and it would drop, bang, and then the clutch would stop it. Sometimes the clutch didn't work, so you get a double bang. And you can imagine that, you go bang, bang, you've got your hand holding the knife. So yes, and again, they were using belts to drive the machinery. So these belts were not covered, open, big leather belts. Yes, I look back now and I think health and safety, wow, that would have been incredible. But, I guess in those days, that's how it was. Nobody even thought about it.
You lost the arm, you lost an arm, right?
Something like that, yes. I know even in Reebok, in our early days, we used to have a machine that roughed up the sole. You've got the leather, you need to rough it up in order for the leather, for the adhesive to work into it. And this was just a motor with a spindle and a wire brush on one side. And we only ever had one problem, excuse me, and that was, and I don't know, I mean, I wasn't in it, Jeff used to run the factory, but he loved the factory, and I did everything else. But this young boy was on the machine, and he had a jumper on, a woolen jumper, and he got caught.
Oh, no.
I mean, fortunately, it stopped the machine.
Right.
He was wrapped into it. They had to sort of almost cut him out of it.
Oh, wow.
He didn't get injured or anything, but see, there was just no sort of safety devices or anything in those days.
I'm sure he didn't wear a woolen sweater the next day, Joe.
No, I don't think he did. No, that was the wrong thing to wear. But again, during the winter, the factories were quite cold. There was no central heating. We did have a heating system which would blow hot air down, but when you're blowing air, it isn't necessarily warm. It might be warm if you feel it, but when it's blowing, it's still quite cold. But yes, the factory days were quite incredible days. But yes.
Yes. Yeah. So one of the things that I really loved within the story in the book was this concept of finding your gatekeepers, this interesting character, John Willie Johnson, and this whole piece on being open to opportunity and creating your own luck. So can you unpack that a little bit, Joe, this concept of gatekeepers and opportunity identification? And
yeah, well, I think that, as I said, Jeff loved to be in the factory. And so that you do everything else. And that included design. I mean, I was doing a lot of design. Jeff loved the factory. He was also a member of the athletic club and a member of the cycling club. So he was a good connection, but that was just straight. So I did the rest of it. And during those early days of Reebok, we didn't have any money. And it was the time when the government had decided manufacturing was not what we would do in the UK. We would be technology. So the clothing industry and the footwear industry, that required lots of workers. And as far as they were concerned, that can go to the Far East. So really, it wasn't a good time. And all the factories, so many factories in the UK were just going out of business. And I would say probably 2 a month would go out of business. And what happened then is that everything that they had came up for auction. So I would go at least once a month, maybe twice a month to the auctions. So I could probably buy a sewing machine. I could probably buy one, or maybe there's some leather I could buy. This is great. And it was one, I went to one place and I bought a lot of leather. And my van was like a speedboat. Of course, unfortunately, a policeman did notice that I looked more like a speedboat than a van. And so I got stopped for that and fined. And I'd been going down to these places, and I'd seen this guy called John Willie Johnson. He was always at the front on the auction. And the auctioneer he'd go around, and if nobody bid, because there were so many bits and pieces of rubbish that nobody ever bid for, he would just look at John, and John would just nod, pass on. And at the end of the auction, they would go together into a room and decide how much that was all worth, and then John would take it all away. But I'm sitting next to him on this occasion, and we're having a little bit of a chat. And I told him, I said, last time I bought the leather and I got pulled up. He said, Joe, he said, you don't need to pick anything up. My men come down to every auction. Whatever you buy, just leave it and my men will bring it back. Oh, I said, thanks, John. I'll pay you for it. No, he said, they're going down there. Why bother paying? We'll do that. So we got chatting, really got friendly. And he invited me to his factory, which was 2 big mills. It was big in Bacup, J.W. Johnson, I think. And I went through and we went into his warehouse where he kept all this stuff that he bought at every auction. Those stuffed animals, big crocodiles, bears, everything that you could imagine.
What was he doing with it? Did he just like to collect stuff? Like, is he eccentric?
Oh, definitely eccentric, yes. But I think it was his passion. His passion was just to go down there and enjoy doing it. These days people do house clearances.
Right. Yeah.
He did factory clearances. Whatever didn't sell, John Willie would take it and put it into his warehouse. And I mentioned in the book, I see this machine. It's a pounding up machine. You wouldn't know what a pounding up machine is, but it takes the crinkles out of when you're lasting a product, lasting a shoe. The leather's fairly hard. It leaves little wrinkles in. You put it on the pounding up machine. It just pounds all these out. And for the rugby, we needed one of those. I said, John, pounding up machine. Can I buy it? He said, no, you can't buy it. Well, can I rent it off you then? No. Oh, sorry. Well, he said, you can have it. Oh, thank you. When you've done with it, just give it me back. And not only did he sort of give it to me, he had his men bring it and install it in the factory. So,
why do you think, Joe, why do you think he showed you that kindness? That's one of the things that you never articulated in the book as to why he took you under his wing. Why do you think he did that?
Well, I think the auctioneer was the same, because the auctioneer, every time I bid for anything, he'd say, come on, guys. Look, this guy's no money. And he's still buying.
They're trying to help you out.
So we became a bit of a legend there in the fact that, Reebok is fine. We've no money, we're a small company, but we're still there. We're still going.
Right.
All these people were going out of business. And I think that Johnny Johnson, I think he enjoyed that, and he enjoyed our chats, because he looked and he said, Reebok, He could see that if there was a company going to succeed, it would be Reebok.
Because of you or the brand?
Well, I think I personified the brand at that time.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Because he saw the brand through me. We were in sports footwear. And, we went through many recessions during my time, many recessions, but Reebok never had a recession. And I wondered, why does Reebok got a recession? Because sport was the thing that kept growing. Sport grew and grew. Sport always grew, didn't have a recession. So whilst the footwear industry, that went down at times, had bad times, the recession never affected us. We just kept growing slowly and slowly. And you went to some of these auctions and you'd find there's a production line, and there's there's 3 spaces where there's no machine. And why was that? Because it was called British United Shoe Machinery, part of the American United Machine Machinery Company. They used to rent these out. So you'd pay a minimum rent. Then you'd pay so much for every pair that you produce. And of course, when the business goes down and you can't do it, that's what drives you out of business. So we learned that pretty soon. Don't get any of these rental
how do they know how many shoes you make in those days, Joe? Surely they didn't have technology monitoring it. Was it an honor system?
No, they had quite a good system of monitoring. Yes, they could tell, because these machines were putting nails in.
Right.
Lasting. So they had a good idea as to what you were doing. So the more nails that you put in, the more. And it probably was very much like half a penny for a dozen nails, but by the time you'd finished, it was mounted and it was there, and the sort of the standard rent was there anyway. You still had to pay whether it was £50 a month or whatever, in whatever day. It really drove a lot of these people out of business. So look, I learned the lesson early on. No, we don't go to that. We'll see if we can buy some of the old machinery. And you could buy it for nothing. We set up our factory for maybe £150, because you could buy some of the machines for £25. Not a lot of money, but there were big stuff, heavy stuff, and that's why we had to put them around the side of the factory. They were more mechanical than hydraulic or pneumatic. Those came in. Pneumatics and hydraulics came in later, but when we first started, they were more mechanical. So things had to, that big press I was talking about, when J.W. Foster's closed down eventually, and he had to shut the factory, father asked us, well, do you want any of my machinery? And at that time, we were actually buying cut soles from a local manufacturer would cut them for us. If we took the machine, we could cut our own, which meant it would save us, stocking things. It would be more convenient. And we did this, but as you've read in the book, we had a factory, we had an old brewery. For whatever it was, the ground floor, there were no windows in, so we couldn't use that. The middle floor was fine, yeah, great. The top floor, the roof was so bad that there was water coming in all over, and there were more buckets and tin cans and everything collecting water than we could use. So we're on that middle floor, but that middle floor was not the securest. And we did get this machine from my father, and that in itself was an experience because we had to take it up a set of stairs. I mean, we were talking about 2 tons. I mean, this was a big machine, and we had to slide it up these stairs. And we use a pulley and chains, and we levered it up. And there was myself and another young guy we'd just taken on behind it, pushing. And I do think today, what happened if that machine had slipped? If something had have gone, we would have been nothing at the bottom of that. So you do think how close you get on occasions to think, wow. But however, we did get it up there, and we tried to sort of use a crowbar underneath it to get it across the floor. But every time I put the crowbar underneath it and lifted, the crowbar would just go straight through the floor. Oh, can't do that. So we had to get blocks of wood and get it onto the wood, and then we could crowbar it in place. But then when we did get it in place, and we got Norman, our clicker, using this, every time it came down, the floor went boom. Oh. So we had to shore up underneath to make sure that didn't take the floor. But yeah, again, we did our own electricity, we did everything. And you learn an awful lot, but the problem is you learn a dangerous amount. You learn how to do some things with electricity, but you're not really that knowledgeable. You can connect 2 wires and you can change it for a machine to go backwards, but yes.
In the story, you guys were continuously battling. And how, in terms of when things got really difficult, how did your grandfather's legacy and J.W. Foster impact your will to succeed? Like, had you not come from J.W. Foster and your grandfather not been who he was, do you feel that you would have had the strength of resolve? Was that a big part of your driver?
I think so. I think our upbringing, the way we looked at life, that you always move forward. You're always optimistic because your glass of wine is either half full or half empty. In life, you're either going forward or you're going back. You can never plateau. A plateau is somewhere where you jump off to die. It's like, no, we have to keep going. So it was all a matter of you have a dream. You think you're going to be as big as Adidas, or you're going to get somewhere. And so it was always, well, these are challenges. And the one thing I did learn is that whenever we got a challenge, if you were willing to look at it, you could probably either divert it, turn it around, or sometimes really make it an opportunity. We can say that, all right, we started off as Mercury Sports Footwear, and we found we couldn't register that. And by the chances as we went, and I found Reebok in my dictionary that we were talking about, RWBOK, a small South African gazelle.
Spelled the wrong way, which,
well, yeah.
I mean, that's on the American dictionary, right?
That's right, yeah. In the Oxford English, it would have been RHEBOK. And
which would have been weird.
Been weird. I think I would have gone past it, but RWBOK, I mean, it actually engendered sort of a lot of different ideas. Like when we used to repair our shoes, we could put on repairs, RWE and things like that, and resole RWE, and so there was a lot of things were good, and Weebox. I came out of Reebok, for a W. So, these sort of things came out of it. But now, was that luck? You think it's misfortune, you can't use your name, and then all of a sudden you find out something better.
Joe, I want to touch on that. you said something in the book that's super important, and I really relate to it. And I actually think that it's probably one of the only few things I do really well is make the connection between ideas and people. And you figure out how to get where you need to go, leveraging both. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, with everything, I think it was the same. After we got our name, you think a little bit, you see something, and I think you've got to be looking for the opportunity, not looking for how do we. Oh, we're in a problem here. This is a problem. We've got to get over this. Instead of thinking of the problem, you're thinking of the opportunity. And it was the same. We've been in business about 4 years, and we got a letter from Adidas because our silhouette was 2 stripes and a T-bar. And of course, Adidas complained that was 3 stripes, and they would sue us if we continued. And you think, but it don't. It was great. We thought, wow, all of a sudden, Adidas know we're here. Yeah, we've made it. We got them worried. They need to write us a letter to say we're infringing.
It's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, but it's what it was, and it was like, wow, that's great. What do we do? Oh, we had a silhouette there, 2 stripes. So we changed the silhouette. And we changed it into what we see now, which is the vector, which is more of an arrow. Great. And so we now have a different silhouette. And then I happen to be very well in with the local Saab now. And I was driving a nice Saab car, and the guy in Manchester said, Joe, can you come along? Because Sebastian Coe, Seb Coe, who is now sort of head of, I think it's international athletics, is it? Seb Coe. He said, we sponsor it. Oh, I said, fine. I said, but yeah, it's nice. I'll come along. Came along. Can you make a pair of shoes for him? I said, well, he's sponsored by Nike. Don't be difficult, really. I can't really make it. He said, well, instead of putting Reebok on, can you put Saab on it? And he gave me a couple of pieces of, well, there were labels that they used to sew onto clothes just to say, this is Saab. I said, I'll see what I can do. And I went back, and of course, we had this arrow shape, and I thought, I can't stitch this on. Maybe if I cut a little window into it and sew it in behind, that'd work. And it did. And I take these shoes along with no sign of Reebok, apart from the silhouette was Reebok, but there was Saab in this window. And I gave them to Seb. I have a photograph, me and Seb Coe. I'm giving this pair of Reeboks. I don't think we dare really print it, but I don't know these days. Maybe you never know. But I'm looking at these shoes and I think, wow, that looks pretty good. That. Why don't we put Reebok in there? Mm. And that's how we started using the window with putting Reebok in. And that comes about by something else drives the thinking. So this and I mean that window became quite an item, particularly when we were doing say aerobics, when we had a nice simple pure white shoe with just this little window were Reebok and the Union Jack, and that Union Jack was just a dash of colour, and the women loved it. Mm. So these things, I had the the Starcrest, which looked a bit like the Union Jack. And when we first started off in America, first got going with our 5-star shoes, and Paul said, "Can we use the Union Jack instead of the Starcrest?" I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, it's going to cost me $1 million," he said, to get the Starcrest recognized. He said, "But everybody in the USA knows the Union Jack." Oh, right. The UK, of course, it was a different story because the trade unions hated the idea that we were, by them, making shoes in Korea and put on a Union Jack. Right? So we had lots of fun with that as it happened. But the Union Jack was incredible. With one on each shoe, and we had the box. The lid was a Union Jack. And these were early days in our running experiences in America. So selling the shoes down there, being a 5-star shoe, of course, all of a sudden were lots of orders. That was great that we'd done that.
I mean, I remember as an American kid opening a Reebok box with the Union Jack. You just felt like you had literally received shoes from the Queen. You know, it was so regal, right? And so clean. And there was definitely that sense of, wow, this is royalty. This shoe has come straight from Buckingham Palace. But it was quite extraordinary. So you're building Reebok, and you're working a lot. One of the things you touch on quite a lot in your book is how much you worked. And there's a sense of, I feel, regret at times for the imbalance in terms of the family and work. And I feel that your view is that this imbalance is a must for anyone that goes all in. So I guess my question is, Joe, what's your view on going all in and trying to balance work and home life, and reflecting now that you're well beyond where you were when you were building the business? Are there any regrets?
People talk about regrets. No, there are no regrets. It's a bit sad sometimes, but to sort of blame it on your business. I know my wife, my first wife, she used to say, "Why don't you get a proper job?" So many times, because we struggled. I mean, in those early days, it was a struggle, but you had to keep fighting. You just had to keep going, and it was like, well, either somebody is with you, and my wife was obviously with me. When I was 23, Jeff was 25, and we set up our own factory. We were young, we were indestructible. What could happen? We can do it. So
with the two genes.
With two genes, yes. Yes, 2 genes, absolutely, yes. That was a bit of a confusion for the postman, of course, and the inland revenue. Not that we made much money, but
yeah, right.
Yeah. But when it comes to it, I think whether I did or I didn't convince my first wife that you've got to become part of it. We can't have two things. You got the love for Reebok and you have a love for a family, but it's better if you can bring that together. Right now you probably receive messages from Julie, and we're together. If we go anywhere now, it's 2 tickets. I must have, Julie comes with me. We do it together. So we share a love and a passion. Now it's the passion for Shoemaker. We share that. Let's make it happen. And I think that's what you need in those early days. I think the one probably distraction for that is having a family. Because if you have a family, the wife is usually then looking after children. But I think really it is a matter of whether you will do things together. And I know I was talking with a guy in California who has Wolf and Shepherd, which is a nice men's shoe brand. But he and his wife work together. They work together on it. I think probably this becomes a bit of a sort of a dilemma, because Jeff and I work well together, but then we had 2 wives, and I could never get on with Jeff's wife.
Right.
And there was always that tug between 4 people, and Jeff, we never fell out. I can't remember ever having a crossword with Jeff. We didn't. He looked after the factory. I looked after more or less everything else until we had to bring people in. So I think it's how do you manage these things? The fact that Jeff and I worked together, I think, meant that we could drive a company. we could make it happen. Then you've got your family life, and towards the latter end, when we started to really make it, Jean came on one global trip.
That turned pear-shaped.
Yeah.
I could not believe what happened.
I couldn't either.
Wow.
It was quite incredible. I couldn't believe that that would, at that point of time, I think, this is what you do all the time? No, you know, I mean, it's just the fact that, as we've read in the book, those Japanese thought they were doing me a good favor. Wow, the British girls there, they might be stripping, but the British girls. But, you know, that I think that's a bit of how life is, that, you know, I'd got used to cultures. I'd been traveling almost every culture in the world. So I was used to people doing different things you didn't really expect. But once you got used to the idea, you're not phased. You've got one, what you're looking at is developing your brand. And what they're looking at is developing a relationship. So whatever the people you meet do, they're only trying to improve that relationship and make you feel welcome. So yes, but she did travel later, one global trip, and of course a couple of times, maybe 3 times, on the Monte Carlo events, which are always very glamorous, with meeting all these different people. So, you know, she enjoyed that, which you would do. But of course, it's everything that built up in between. And unfortunately, she had a very close relationship with our daughter, because they were together. And not that I hadn't a close relationship, but it was different. And they were more friends, more my daughter. And unfortunately, when she died, of course, and I think it was how we reacted. It's not that either of us were not very, very sad at this event, but I think Jean had lost more. Jean had lost that friend that Sunday with the children. And so it did eventually end our relationship. But I mean, I look around, and it's not as though I'm the only one that's ever divorced,
No.
you know, or that relationships go beyond that point. But I do think if you have something like Reebok, or a passion for something, and, you know, when we changed our name, and I took the Reebok name to the patent agent, and I said to them, look, we've got all these other names that you wanted, but we want that. We need to be in love with it. It has to be our passion. And I think that is it. If you're going to do something, it has to be a passion. If you're going to be successful, maybe people are lucky and they win things without being passionately involved in it. But I don't know. It didn't work for me. It's the same reason why I left at the end. At the end, was the passion gone? Yeah, the company's big now. It's grown up. It can manage without me. So the challenges and the passion, they have to be there. And if you can share them, brilliant. You know, that's how it should be. But yes, it does cause a lot of, I don't say friction, but it does cause problems when you have a company, and eventually it gets so big. And I was being drawn all over the place. And Jean had the opportunity to come, but she preferred to stay with the grandchildren and things like that, which doesn't really help, because it's nice when you can go together. I mean, I remember so many things. I remember stepping on the dance floor of Ginger Rogers' studio in LA, and that vision is here still, but only I have that vision. If you've got somebody with you, you'd share that. And for me, that's the difference. Try to work together.
Yeah, I think that was the piece that wasn't necessarily clear in the book, as to, did you want her to come with you? And now it's quite clear that you would have preferred to have the journey together but ultimately you were just two different people, I suppose.
I think that's the thing, yes.
So that actually, this piece on travel, one of the things that I think was quite prevalent, one of the most prevalent themes throughout the book, and also something that Reebok has done quite well throughout her history, was firstly, your absolute single-mindedness to get into the United States. Now, I'd like to unpack why that was so important to you. Was it growth for growth's sakes? Was it strategic? Did you know that you had to get there to become a global brand? And the second part of that question is Reebok's ability to find niches. Like Reebok has always been a major brand, but a brand that's found and created new trends. So can we talk a little bit about that, the United States, as well as your ability as a brand to just always find, from aerobics to CrossFit, it's been, it's interesting.
Well, I think for me, I was looking at our business. We were a small business because we were in athletics. We'd missed the opportunity to be in soccer, football. By the time Jeff and I had managed to get away from Foster's, football was then in the hands of Adidas, Puma, and a few of the British manufacturers. The British manufacturers were taking the low end, and Adidas was taking the influential end of it. To go in there, we needed money, and the last thing we had was money. We had all the energy, all the talent, and you name it. We could produce a football boot. But I mean, we all know today that you can go anywhere and produce a product, but it's having people buy it, it's being able to get into the market, being in there. So our limitation to the business would be the size we could grow within the United Kingdom. And you don't need to be a brain surgeon to recognize the fact that the big markets like football, their volume will create so much energy and so much money that they will absorb you. They will swallow you. Eventually, no matter how good you are on a small market, the big man will come in and take the market. And we could see signs that Nike, they were starting to come over later on in the 70s. They'd grown big. Adidas were already there, but Nike were more in running than Adidas. And so Nike would come in and take our area. So what we needed to do is to look around what market influences the world. And the market that influences the world is the USA. It still does today. It's still that massive. Plus the fact that there's volume. And in those sort of late 60s days, I knew that college and university, they all had coach. And you could go to college on a scholarship, on an athletic scholarship. You didn't need to be academic. You could go on an athletic scholarship. And that meant volume. I had to get into that market. And it so happened that as we started to work hard to get into that market, running also became a category that grew. All of a sudden, running became something that, a sport that wasn't just athletics. It wasn't just track and field anymore. All of a sudden, it was on the road. All you needed was a pair of shoes and you could enter a race. It was growing massively. It grew to be the biggest of all the sports, which was, again, fortunately, we were in that category at that time. So we were there. It's a matter of not letting it pass us. Runner's World was driving that market. They drove it because it started off as just a simple black and white single page Runner's World. It ended up as the glossiest magazine that you could think, with photographs of everything. And they were so influential that they started rating shoes. So if you were number one shoe, everybody wanted your shoe. That in itself was a problem. It was a mistake, because I think Nike would probably get it. Adidas were not in the running scene at that point. They didn't appear. They were track and field, but they were certainly not in road. And
Did you have
so
to, Joe, did you, just on that, did you have to contend with corruption, like with a magazine being so powerful, like underhanded influence from Nike or Adidas to the publishers? Like, was that going on back then?
I would say there was certainly a lot of collusion. I wouldn't say there was corruption.
Yeah.
There may well have been,
Yeah.
but I would not have said that. A lot of collusion. Nike, they were in Oregon, and of course it was just north of San Francisco. That was Bob Anderson with his Runner's World. They were close together. They were both Americans.
Yeah.
So I would say there was a bit of hand in hand working together. Yes. I think that happens in anything.
That's right.
You go where the influence is. so they were together. But when Bob Anderson came out with his number one, number two, if you were a number one, I'm sure Nike did this. I can't quite remember exactly what the running shoe would be, but Nike, of course, didn't make in America. They had to import, and like anything, if all of a sudden your demand goes from, we'll say, 500 pairs of shoes a month to 50,000 pairs of shoes, the question is, how do you do it? How do you get there? And of course, it takes you 6 months. Tooling up, getting the factories, getting everybody up to speed. 6 months later, you're managing to do it. And then in a few months after that, there's going to be another number one. So the retail trade were really, really upset about this, because by the time they got the shoe, they could be left with stock. They're left with this shoe now, because it wouldn't be the same shoe that would be number one the next year. It would be a different shoe. And so this happened for about 2 or 3 years. And I don't know whether it was Bob Anderson himself or somebody persuaded him, you got to change that. And he changed it to a star rating. So top of the tree, 5 stars. Now that could be 4 shoes. It could be 4 shoes with 5 stars. I mean, instead of just being one winner, 5 shoes. And I recognized the fact that if I was going to get there, I had to get a 5-star rated shoe. My first trip to America was 1968. And it took me till 1979 before I actually really got a distributor. I had 6 in between, and they'd all failed. We'd failed miserably trying to get that working. But once I got the 5-star shoe, that was the hook. That was the hook that got us into America. And I got Paul Fireman, and he was the gatekeeper. He was an American. He knew about distribution. So that worked fantastic. That's how we got into that. And as it happened, running was doing quite nicely. But we had, down in Los Angeles, we had this tech rep called Arnold Martinez. Have you heard of Arnold?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, Arnold Martinez. Well, he's a great man. Yeah, he's done a lot of things. And his wife, Frankie, she was coming home full of this, had been to these aerobic classes with her friends. Great. And Arnold said, well, what's it all about? She said, it's exercise to music. It's great. You know,
we all remember Jane Fonda, right?
That's right. That's right. That happened as a result of what Arnold was doing. Because Arnold went down to see one of these classes, saw the instructor in trainers, and half the class, the other half class, nothing. For Arnold, that was a light bulb moment as well. Why don't we make a nice white shoe, cushion, soft, just like a glove? And he did. Well, he went back to Paul Fireman, and Paul Fireman said, what? We're doing well in running. We're doing great. It's fine. Why do we want to make a shoe for these girls jumping about down there in LA? Oh, so Paul didn't want to know about it. So Arnold went round to the back door and had a word with the production people. The production people produced him 200 pairs of shoes, which he distributed down there in LA. And like I say, Jane Fonda, and she bought a pair of shoes. Can you believe it? You know, and these people. So it became Hollywood. The trend just suddenly took off. These women, we were not known in America. The running fraternity started to know us. We were growing nicely. But in America, yeah, they knew Nike, they knew Adidas. They didn't know Reebok. Adidas, Nike, male, sweaty. all of a sudden, this beautiful little company called Reebok are making women's shoes, and making this nice aerobic shoe. And that's what just took off.
So you're
I say
saying
from
that,
nine-
so Joe, just on that, you're saying that sometimes it's actually easier to be the smaller unknown player, undefined.
Well, certainly for us, yes. And certainly for us, because once you're defined and once you pigeonholed, that's you. But all of a sudden, Reebok became a woman's shoe in the eyes of America. Then it became a travel shoe. It became a shoe that you were so comfortable. And I think that two things that happened for Reebok that changed the sports industry. Okay, Arnold had them made out of glove leather, and that was disaster. When I heard about it, what, glove leather? You can't do that, because they were trying to use the leather side. We had used suede glove leather for racing shoes, but when you try and take that surface off, glove leather is less than 1 millimeter in thickness when you start. You try and work on that and you have nothing left. So they just fell apart, and for 3 months, those shoes are just falling apart. Fortunately, this was LA, this was America. They didn't care. The women loved it. They didn't care. Yeah, they gave you all the time in the world to get it right. The women loved it so much, they would go out. In the rest of the world, they didn't have that disposable income or that attitude. They didn't have that. No, if it fell apart, you didn't want to.
That was an interesting concept you talked about in the book, and I really reflected upon that. The American consumer behavior and the willingness to give you birth if you make a mistake as a supplier. It's so true. Whereas in the UK or in Australia, you'd be over.
We would have been dead. Yes, yeah, we would have been out of business. I think there's no question with something like that. It would have been a killer. Yes, but no, in America, that was it, and like the story just exploded from there. So why do I believe in America? Why had I got to go to America? Well, you have it. It's like they give you the opportunity. There is the opportunity. There is the volume. There is the money. All that was there in America. We did a comparison between America and other markets, and if you put America at 100, I think the UK came in at 15. I think Germany came in at something like 25, and I think Japan came in at something like 30. So that's the comparison of a market. And for me, we're in Europe, but the minute you cross the channel, languages, culture, all these things are different. You've got to make your mark in each one.
Yeah.
But go to America, and that whole the whole continent, they speak English. Okay, a little differently on occasions, but you can understand people. But the attitude, that mental attitude, the attitude of a country growing up of different cultures, all coming together in an understanding and opportunities. Everybody, the whole concept of America was opportunity. Why did they go there? Opportunity. So opportunity, I think, is steeped into the American psyche. It's there, and I think that being able to use that, because there's a lot of us in England who probably have the same psyche, but there's so many who don't.
Well, you actually touched upon that, Joe, many a times early on in your book about growing up in a culture that was very much steeped in don't rise above your station, right? Like there was a real limitation. You talked about that, which when you talk about America, you almost sound like an American, which is interesting. So
well, I think it is. I think it's something that the people who went to America had that feeling. Okay, they went to escape on a lot of occasions, but they went to create.
Yes.
They went for opportunity, and for me, that was the same for Reebok. We needed to take that opportunity. I think my grandfather had it. I think he, in today's world, he would have been a champion as well. He would have really, because what he did in his time, since it was so localized, you don't recognize it. And I say localized, but he had a global business. He was selling shoes all over. He was selling shoes to America, all over Africa. In fact, the Commonwealth. That was, or in those days, the empire, I guess. Everybody wanted something and he could make it. So he was selling shoes to America. Well, I don't think he was, but Foster's did have an agreement in America with Yale University, Bob G and Jack and Frank Ryan. And again, same thing. And they distributed Foster's shoes, but they were distributing the hand sewn. Again, there was no creativity, there was no growth. And whilst I did connect with Frank Ryan after Foster's closed, he was probably too old. At that time, he was probably in his 60s, and I don't think the energy was there. It's like asking me to set up a running shoe company now.
So, well, let's talk about that, because towards the end of the book, when you became a founder, I think that putting myself in your shoes, it would have been very difficult. And I got a sense that it was difficult for you, but through the book, you were quite diplomatic about it. What was that like, being a founder, yet stranger, as you mentioned, in your own company?
Well, I think that when you start something with only 2 people, and then you've got maybe 20,000 people, the amazing thing is that there's not that focus anymore. It's nice once you have that focus. And we can go back to Johnny Johnson. I went in his factory, and he took me through the factory on every floor, and he spoke to every person and he knew their name. And that amazed me at that time. How do you know all these people? But there is a limit to how many people you know. And when a company gets as big as Reebok are, you have to have a different mentality. So it's a different drive. The drive that I had, the adventure, the challenges, they weren't there. And the connectivity, you don't connect with everybody. You see new faces and people are going by, and when, oh, you're Mr. Foster. When he comes up and says, oh, Mr. Foster, and you think, oh, it's Joe. Joe was part of this company, not Mr. Foster.
That's my grandfather.
Yes. And I think you realize that you're better off then going really farther back and, become a founder, be a founder. And that's, if somebody wants to talk, and even today they still want to talk. It's quite amazing that some people want to. We've already addressed. I've already addressed 2 of the regions of Reebok have come and said, "Will you do as a Q&A?" And now we have one for Central Europe, which is coming up in a couple of weeks' time. That the people working for the company just want to, since the book's been out, and then I think Reebok have bought about 500 books into the company.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we did a lot of signing for that, because you can't go around. COVID didn't allow signings, so they would come and buy from me. We got the books and we signed them and we sent across. And so, yeah, people still want to hear that slight difference. Like you read the book. The book tells a story, but there's inside stories in every story. There's other little bits and pieces that that's left there, because when I started writing the book, and I had some help, I needed help, because I'm going here and I did that, but I'm still doing that, and I did, but I also did that. And I did.
Oh, yeah,
so
right. Yeah.
I needed help to bring it together to keep the story in line, and I could have drifted off to many different things that I did, but the story has to be a story. And so, yes, I think there are many side stories that are always there. 31 years, you can't put it down into 300 pages or 80,000 words. There has to be more to it. But what you have to get in the 80,000 words is really how the story went, that linear sort of growth. And where did it come from? Where did it end? And the bits in between, they get you to the end. And so I can put some things in, but there are personal things, there are other things that, you just don't, they will come out in time. And I think some of these, like we're doing now, and I must have done 50 different interviews since, and we go in a different pattern each time. There's a similar drive, but there's just a different pattern, a different question. And I think that's good, because it allows me to tell those bits that I couldn't get, the deviations.
Yeah. You get to familiarize with the detail in your story. And you just touched on something, and it will form part of my last question. You talked about Reebok requesting your book internally, about 500 copies. And I would imagine part of that is to get Reebok staff to reconnect with the past and actually where Reebok has come from. And we know that Reebok's been recently sold by Adidas. Would you say that Reebok has kind of lost her way and is looking for herself? And how do you think that's happened, Joe? If you do think so.
Well, I think that when management gets to a certain size, it has to make some decisions. It has to make decisions how to focus. And if you don't focus, if you don't keep a line and you don't keep true to that line, you lose it. You actually lose your way because you have lost your focus. You need somebody to keep pulling you back in. You need something. And that needs to be a few people who really know and who really own that journey. And I think it was probably mid-90s. By the mid-90s, I'd been left about 5 years. Okay, they keep bringing me back for different
consulting,
not for anything. Yeah. But I think Reebok didn't have a plan, didn't have a purpose, and didn't know how to commit to that. I think the biggest problem with that is that once aerobics took over, really the management didn't control the company controlled the management. The growth was so big, so fast, rapid, that nobody sat down to say, just a minute, we don't mind this. I once remember talking to Paul, and Paul said, look, Joe, I know how to stop this, but if I do, I don't know how to start it again. And, these are the problems. When the company is just growing, at the end of it, what pieces do you grab hold of? When you start to think that we're going to plateau, and we can't plateau, because if you plateau, you start going down. You've got to really have a plan as to which way are we going, what piece of this business, what piece of the sport do we own, and what should we own? And I think somewhere around that didn't happen. And it took until 2005 before Adidas bought the company. And Adidas didn't buy Reebok to grow Reebok. They bought it, and you can't blame them. They wanted momentum in America, and Reebok gave them that momentum, helped with that momentum. But Reebok stagnated. Reebok's there. They paid too much for it, I think, to let it die. And okay, it's not seen as much these days, but the sale of Reebok is probably going on. I don't know. It hasn't, to my knowledge, it hasn't been sold yet, but I think there are numerous people talking. And I guess if they want to talk to me, it would be fine, but get a focus. Focus on where you can't be a big global sports brand in every category immediately. You've got Nike, who are 20-something billion, and Adidas, who are nearly the same. And Reebok is down at 2 billion. So you've got to focus and start to grow. Maybe you look back on where you should focus from, where you should start. So I think Reebok will have a good opportunity. I think Adidas have got to the point where they look at Reebok now. It's not contributing much, if anything, to their sales. So for them to sell it, they're so big now that they say, well, if Reebok do start to grow, it's going to take them 10 years to even get anywhere, because it's nowhere near Nike and nowhere near Adidas as far as the size.
It's an interesting thing you just brought up, because it makes me recall to the story because effectively what you said is Adidas bought Reebok not because they had a passion about Reebok, but it was an entry point into the American market. And that actually happened. There was part of that in the early piece with Reebok when Paul got the Englishmen involved, right? And I think there was that piece you wrote in the book around the Englishmen had already a business, and he wasn't so much interested in getting Reebok into the US, but it was about using manufacturing capability. So I guess what I'm saying is it's really interesting that when a business buys or when you sell a business to a firm, to kind of understand what the intention of that firm you're selling to is. Are they actually looking to grow? And I guess if you're selling the business, you may not care, right?
I think that probably was the end, because you've got shareholders, and I think at the end for Reebok, if you're not really progressing and not really growing, you sell for as much money as you can. Either way, you can't blame Adidas, you can't blame the shareholders. These are decisions you make. If your company has not been really growing, it's either a lack of passion or your passion's been dulled, or it's been like taken away from you. So you don't know how to keep the passion. You're better off taking the money, maybe. Selling to Adidas, not the right fit, because you're both in the same channel. So Adidas have to stop you doing certain things so that Adidas can grow. And you can't blame anybody for that. That's what you put your money down for. So Adidas did that. Okay, so I am Reebok, and my passion is still there for Reebok. I think there's still chances for Reebok, but it was obviously by the mid-90s that the management was really not in control. Hadn't picked up from that growth, from that business growth, hadn't really picked up and taken back control of it. The business was still controlling the company, and it was going nowhere. And I don't think it grew very much through the 90s until just over 4 billion maybe, until Adidas were willing to pay $3.8 billion for it. So you sell its turnover, and without any restrictions or whatever. So the company is going to be in the wilderness for a while. And although Adidas have tried to grow it, and I think Adidas have done two really good things for Reebok. And it took them some time. But number one is they decided to have an archive. Adidas had an archive for many years. Nice. And they did recognize that having an archive was a good thing. So they built an archive. And I had lots and lots of stuff, in the attic and loft all over the place. And so now I send it to America. So now it's in Boston in an archive, and it won't get lost, when I'm not around anymore, and things start getting diluted and lost. Number one. Number two is that when they came in, they actually changed the name, and over time they changed the logo to a delta from the silhouette that we have now and the recent one. They changed that, but 2 years ago, I think it's 3 years ago, I think they got a new marketing man, and he came back with the original. He decided to take away all these different changes of lettering. Now we have the Motta Textura, the original lettering that I had way back down there in the 70s. They brought that back, and they brought back the vector. So now we see, as on the book, we've now got the vector, and we've gone back to something that people can recognize. When you turn around, you change it, all these different name styles, different logos. I usually use Ford as an example. You look at Ford, you see that lettering. You see it in a blue oval, and that's Ford. You don't see anything else. You hardly even see designs. You may see the Mustang or whatever, but it's identifying one look, one silhouette. And I think that's what, again, Adidas brought back the one silhouette. And I think they're feeling the benefits. So I think the price that we're looking for, the price I heard was about $2.4 billion. And there's been numerous people hinted, Shaq O'Neal, along with them, Mr. P or whatever it is. So it may become, as a black-owned company. I see nothing wrong in that. I see there's good opportunity.
Well, there's an intrinsic connection with the hip hop street rap community, right? It's built quite a bit of a niche in the community there. So you never know. And I think Reebok's done very well in leveraging influencers, non-traditional influencers,
Yes.
And I think that's what Reebok has always done very well. They found a way to compete with the big players, not on their turf.
Right.
And hopefully we can see them continue to do that.
Oh, I think they will. I think it's going to be very interesting. I think what's going to be interesting is if a new buyer really wants to become a global big brand. Opportunities are there, but that's that. You've got to own a piece of football, soccer in America. You've got to own a big piece of that, because that is probably the one global sport that drives a lot of things. So and that's an expensive thing to get into. But I think with Mr. P, there's a basketball player there, and there's Shaq O'Neal. There's Iverson. I think they have some inroads into one or two specialized sports. Plus, there could be on the side, like you say, the hip hop side of it. Mm-hmm. So it'd be very interesting to see the people sit down and think of some plans and do something different. Life is out there.
And I have no doubt you'll receive a phone call to come and do the inaugural speech at the formed management party that they have. But
well, it would be great, wouldn't it?
You'd have to go.
I would definitely go. Yes.
And you could take Julie as well.
We would both go, no doubt. Julie could.
Well, Joe, look, I really, really want to thank you so much for your time. Again, it's really quite bizarre and surreal to be sitting here having a conversation with you as a kid growing up in the late 80s. It was all about saving as much money as you could to go buy some tennis shoes and some sneakers. And I never in a million years again would have thought that I've been would be enjoying such a conversation as I am right now, Joe. So again, thank you so much for your time.
Been a pleasure for me, and it's great. And I hope that more people know and learn about how Reebok began and its whole life. And I said one of the reasons for writing the book was because Wikipedia and lots of entries had different ways that Reebok started. From that we just changed the J.W. Foster name, lots of things, but the story is in there now. So one of the reasons for writing it was that. And now we've written it, we want it to be a number one.
So where can we find Shoemaker? I know I listen to it on Audible, is how I tend to consume information now because it's quick for me. How can we find the book, Joe?
The book is on Amazon.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many big retailers are open in the States or wherever, but certainly our attack is to try and get into the US. Yeah. And if you can buy it on Amazon, in fact, only at the end of last week, we had the launch of the hardback.
Right.
The export had been in America for a while, but the launch of the hardback came out last week. And I think we seem to be selling quite well. But the other thing is to get a lot more visibility for the book. We always like visibility for the brand. Now we like visibility for the book. And
the consummate marketer, Joe.
There we go.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Joe. I really appreciate it. And we will be talking soon.
I hope so. And it's been great, Ranjit. Nice. Thank you for having a conversation.